Hey guys, Daniel James here, and today we're going to be taking a look at Spitfire Audio's new library, Albion 3. Albion 3 ICENI. I probably pronounced that wrong, but yeah, so the way we're going to do this video, same way we always do, is I've written a track in the background, so we're going to listen to that, and then I'll talk about how I used Albion 3 in it, and then I'll show how I layered it with other libraries and all that fun stuff. So here's the track I wrote. Here we go. So there we go. There's the short track I wrote, and yeah. So as you hear, it was all very big and aggressive, and so that brings me to the first thing of Albion 3. What is it? What is Albion 3? So the point of Albion 3, if you've seen my videos for Albion 1 and 2, the Albion series is primarily orchestral, and the way it's gone so far is Albion 1 was like their it was like their library that covers everything. It's like the orchestral strings, the brass, the winds, percussion, all that good stuff. And then after the first one, it looks like the aim of the libraries has become more focused. So Albion 2, its little niche was it does the like the quiet and the delicate kind of sounds really well. That's like its focus. So all the instruments were in that kind of direction. And now Albion 3 ICENI, its direction seems to be like that really aggressive low end. So let me just show you what instruments you actually get with it. So I should probably bring this back. So when you get the library, you get 4 main banks. You get the Brunel loops, which is like their loop kind of sound, you know, sounds that you hold a key and it will loop over. The Darwin percussion, which is their percussion part of the library. The Steam band, which is normally their manipulated sounds. So they'll take their source audios, like their orchestral recordings, and sometimes some things that weren't in the orchestral recordings, and they make synths and pads and all that kind of cool stuff with. And then the Albion Orchestra ICENI sessions, which is where they, well, not the ICENI, but the Albion Orchestra is where they put their orchestral sounds. And so if I take a look at the orchestral sounds first, because that's primarily what people are going to go to Spitfire libraries for, is the orchestral content. So let's take a look. So you get 4 main patches, right? You get brass low, strings low, brass low, strings low, cellos, strings low, and woodwinds low. So the best way to show what they all do is to just jump into the track and show how I used each patch. So let's start with the strings. So the first one I used, let me just say first of all, you can load up one like strings low, for example, and then key switch between the different articulations. But when I'm doing demonstrations, I prefer to split it out. So I'll just load another patch and then unload the articulations, so that on channel 2 is just the short notes, and then on channel 3 is just the legato. So it's easier for me to show, but you can key switch if you want to. So let me start with the strings low cello. As you can see here, if you've seen my previous videos, you'll know how this interface works, so I won't jump into it too much. But basically, you can change your mic positions here. You can see where your dynamics and your speed of all your notes are, and down here are your articulations. So on the strings low cello, you get quite a few. So you get, well, this cello's low is actually quite interesting. So I'll first just show you down here. So if you look down at the bottom here, you'll see that the cello's low is actually split into two blue regions. A blue region in contact is like a playable region. So if I just highlight this, so as you can see, I'm on my shorts here, and there's two separate playing regions. And the reason that is what they did, Spitfire, is they went and recorded a really large cello section, larger than you would normally have for a cello section. And the reason you've got two is one is panned to the left. Like this is one set of players who are on the left-hand side of the hall. And then you've got another set which is on the right-hand side of the hall. And the reason this is pretty good is because you can actually create parts like I've done here. You'll be able to see that are you can create these really massive sounding cello sections because you've got that full width of that full width of space. You can actually create some really interesting kind of effects. So let's take a listen to this first part I wrote, and this is on the cello's short. Just so you can see, I've highlighted the short articulation here. If this little light's on, that means it's active. And then there's longs, consordino, longs, legato, and legato. And there's two sets of legato here, is because the first set will be only the ones on the left, and the second one will be only the ones on the right. So let me just take a listen to these shorts. As you can see, so the left-hand cello section is down here, and the right-hand cello section is up here. So it sounds like this. I should have probably soloed that first, I apologise. Now, as you can hear, that's a very kind of a wide cello section. I was going to say cello-y, but I'm not sure cello-y is the correct term. If I just take out, like, if I just take these out for now, and this is what, like, just the left-hand side sounds like. That's just basically like a pulse section. And you see, normally if you've listened to orchestral music, on the left-hand side of your, like, when you're listening to orchestral music, on the left-hand side, you're expecting to hear, like, violins and, all your higher kind of instruments. So what I tried to do is I tried to give your ear, I tried to play the high cello parts as, like, the kind of moving, how do I explain this? So, like, the low-end parts of the cello, I tried to keep, like, simple, like, because you're not really, your ear doesn't really want to hear that. And then you got the higher ones on the left. Anyway, so the pulse I've put on the left-hand side, like where you're expected to hear the violins. And then on the right-hand side, where you're actually used to hearing, like, the cello, I've just gone. And the first thing you've probably noticed is that these short notes are actually pretty quick. If I actually up the tempo, this will probably sound too bad, but you may have noticed that it can do. And this is normally the downfall of many spiccato or staccato strings, is it can actually do the fast strings really well, which I was really impressed with, actually. Which is why I wrote the lines so kind of tight together, like these parts here. So, if you're wanting to write really fast kind of action passages and you need a cello section, this is a good place to start, because not only is it the largest cello section, I think, sampled, it can also do those really snappy, sharp ones. The first thing that actually caught my ear was that for a large section there, initially it sounded quite soft to me. And then I realised that if you come up here, you can actually turn on and off different mic positions. And if you've seen my previous videos, the reason I like mic positions, you can add more air to the room. That's usually what I talk about, how you can add more air to the room, or more, more of the hall sound to the room. And the cool thing here is if you turn the close mics on, particularly on the short ones, and whenever you're trying to use a short instrument, it adds a real kind of a grit to the sound. I mean, if I take this down, because this is what it would have initially sounded like. And you know, you may or may not agree with me. You know, it sounded because of the size of the cello section, I was expecting it to be really aggressive. And while aggressive, it's quite it was quite soft. But then I just whacked on the close mics, and I'll turn it up gradually so you can hear that kind of listen for the harsh edge attack, you know, the really aggressive attack as I bring up the close mic. And then it was perfectly aggressive, and you know, it fit in perfectly. So so yeah, with the cellos, you know, you can do that kind of thing. So then on to the next track, I have, I believe, the strings low. So strings low is whereas strings low cellos is only cellos, and it's 2 cello sections split side to side. So you know, half of the cellos are over on the left hand side of the hall, and the other section is on the right hand side of the hall. The strings low section without the cellos is actually strings, not strings, it's cellos and double bass, a cello bass. Well, it says CB, I assume that means, oh no, that's close bass. So that's the double basses, which if you don't know your orchestral instruments, it's kind of like a really big cello. I mean, it's a double bass. I mean, you could say it looks like a really big violin, or like an Alice in Wonderland sized violin. What? Anyway, so same thing here again. I went with the shorts. The short articulations, and again when I loaded it up, it felt a bit soft. And the cool thing that they did here, which I actually really like commend them for, is that they gave you a close mic option for both the cellos and the bass independently. So if I just play, it's a very simple line. I was just accenting the downbeats. I've got a better section here. As you can hear, that's really nasty and aggressive, which is what you want when when you're going for that kind of, that really low growly kind of. And so if I just bring both of these mics down, all the way down to here, I want to, if you turn them all the way down, they switch off, and then it'll start loading in and out instruments, and there'll be clicks and pops everywhere. So so at first it sounded like this, and let's say I liked the sound of it, but I just wanted to accent the basses more. I can just bring in the close mics on the bass. Or I could, for example, just bring in the cellos. But what I went for is, because I've already got a big cello section going on, I pulled down the close mics on the cellos quite a bit, and I pumped up the bass all the way to the top. And again, the shorts are really aggressive. And one thing I should mention with these ones is you get 2 different types of shorts. You get the staccatos, which are probably actually would have been more of a fit. Let me load these in. If you hear any clicks and pops, that's my computer having a struggle with doing, you know, recording the video at the same time. So if I do the same line with the staccatos. So the first ones are a lot more aggressive than the second, but I think on like lines like this where it's really, you know, when you want a staccato, because I assume the first is a spiccato, which is a very kind of so if you've seen the difference between spiccato and staccato is almost like the attack of the note. So like a spiccato is a very quick bounce on the string, and a staccato is more of like an aggressive kind of scrape across the string. And there, you know, so the spiccato, which is the short here, which I assume it's spiccato, I may be wrong, but it's a more aggressive sound because you're on the note for, you know, it's very quick and aggressive. And you know, it's a very subtle difference, but you know, depending on what you want for your sound, you know, that will change what you're after. And then, you know, so I've got back on this section, so I've got just accenting the beats here, and then over here, let me just load up the cellos. I'll show how well they work together. So this is the cello part over here. Again, this is a good example of how it can do the fast notes really well on the cellos. It sounds like this. I'll just pull these out so you can hear one. Can of course pull these down. that was a bad example. I thought they went lower, but I was wrong. And then if I just take this one out. So there's my full cello section. And then if you envision in your head, in front of this really wide arced cello section, with these being on the right and these being on the left, in the middle, I've now got the cellos and basses. So this is a very extremely large cello bass section. Right, so the cello bass sounds like this. And it feels like this sounds like it's in the middle. It's almost like a third cello section, which sounds like it's kind of central. And then the double basses feel like they're more over to the right, where they should be in an orchestral setting, which is cool. And I'll explain later, because that actually, because the basses are over to the right and the cello's in the middle, it leaves space for, if you want any high instruments like violins and stuff, which I did in this track. I layered it with some other sample libraries to show how well it layers with the with higher instruments, if you wanted to use it in that context. But because the basses and the cellos, well, the cellos in the middle and the basses are over to the right, it leaves space over on the left for you to fill with violins and such. So if I play the two together, you'll hear how well they create like this very big cello section. It's really low and it's really powerful, and I think that's what they were going with this library, is a very strong, powerful low end. Okay, so let's move on to the next instrument I used in this track, which was actually the strings low again, except this time I used the legato. So this is legato and this is portamento. I didn't use portamento in this track because it's an action track. It would have got lost, but I will show you what it sounds like in a second. So for the low section, if I just show you it in its entirety, so all the instruments, this little section here. So the point of this part was to show, like, it was trying to be like, give this kind of menacing feel. So what I did is I pulled up the low string and then put on the legato, and it sounds, if you've ever done a film where you need like a bad guy, like you need that kind of, whenever the bad guy walks in, you need that feeling of evil. These low strings do very well at putting that across. They sound like this. And before I got my hands on Albion 3 ICENI, my favourite low end sustain was in Albion 1. Their low octave sustain patch was what I would use whenever I wanted that really fat low end sustain sound. But this completely blows it out of the water, and the reason is, again, because I've got full control over the the bass close and the cello close. So let me pull out the cello. Oh, I turned it off. I didn't mean to turn it off. I'm sorry. And then if I pull the cello back up. And I don't know if you can hear how well the legato works. It's got like a kind of very natural kind of slap that goes in between the notes. And another thing is it's very dynamic. So if I bring the mod wheel, you can't see this, I don't think. Let me just put it up on here. Oh yeah, if you play outside the range, you get a little Albion help that tells you that you're playing outside the range. But you can turn those off by clicking up there and boom, gone. Okay, so if I just, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, mod wheel. So if you look down, which patch amount on this one. So if you look down here or up here, this is my mod wheel. So mod wheel down, mod wheel up. So let's just take a listen. And one of the best sounding parts of this is when you've got the dynamics all the way up and you change a note, you can really feel that it doesn't sound like a MIDI instrument changing note. There's a very audible kind of slap on the strings of the notes. It's kind of like, I don't know how you would explain it, but normally when you have MIDI instruments, this is what legato sampling's got to at the minute, which is awesome. But it used to be if you'd change notes, you would hear every instrument change a note at the exact same time. So it would go da da da, and then the legato would sound like that. Whereas this, it's kind of got like a slur between the change of the notes. Not a slur as in like an actual slur, but because you can actually hear the each player is changing note at a different time, which happens naturally. And there's a kind of shum, shum. Yeah. I'll stop trying to explain it with my mouth, but I'm sure you heard it. So that brings me down to the next section I wrote, which was over here. I used one of the legato cello sections over here. That makes a lot more sense in context. This might be loud, but this is what it sounds like with everything else. I told you it would be loud. Yeah, so I was just using that to double, and let me just show you what that sounds like. Come up here. Oh, I went out of the range. Okay, so where is my range? Where is my range? Up here. So again with the dynamics, got a very nice soft kind of sound. And again, I'll stop saying and again, but if you look here, I chose not to put the close mic on because I wanted this to be a backgroundy kind of instrument. As you heard it when I put it in context with everything, there's a lot going on, and I wanted this just for the feel of that kind of cello passage going on in the background. So yeah, let me just quickly, before I change onto another instrument, just show you what I didn't cover. So Portamento is kind of like the when you change notes very noticeably, when you kind of slide between the notes. Normally you would use that in conjunction with I'm not sure where the key switch is. Where is it? It's down here. You see, this is the problem with having a 61 key keyboard. No, there. So you would normally do something like that, you know, you would change with the key switch in between. Okay, what else didn't I cover? I didn't cover the consordino. These are on the left-hand side, I believe. Yeah, the left-hand section. So as you saw, this is a good example of what I was talking about, where, so if you choose this legato, it will switch over to the the cello section, which is on the left hand side of the hall, which is where your normally like your violins or something would be, but in this case this is where like your left hand cello section is. And then if you pick these two over here, it's just your right ones. They don't have a legato section for both, and I assume that's so that people wouldn't like go from down in the left hand section and then try and play a note in the right hand section. There would be no legato transition going from the left hand group of players to the right hand group of players, because that would have been unusual and probably pointless. So the consordino is on the left hand section, which sounds like this. Oh, consordino's muted, so there's like a mute on the strings. And these aren't legato, so if you wanted, you could play some consordino type chords, you know. And again, that one of the highlights of the Spitfire libraries is that they are recorded at Air Lyndhurst, which is a beautiful sounding hall. So you know, so it's got particularly the consordinos, which I spoke about in Logria Albion 2, is that you know, that when you've got the consordino, there's something like you feel the air more in the room. Okay, so that's all the strings low, and I think I covered pretty much all the, yeah, I covered all these. Oh, and the only one I didn't cover is the string low longs, which is basically the same as the legato without the legato in there, so you could play chords and such. Let me just show you what that sounds like. So you know, it's like the legato without the legato. A sustain patch, as it were. Oh yeah, something I wanted to show here is, God, I'm only on the strings, jeez. We'll get to the brass in a second. Okay, so this is the cello shorts again. I just wanted to show that kind of that fun interplay between the two sides, where it goes from left to right, left to right. So of course this is the section on the right, section on the left. I just wanted to show that you can create some interesting effects because you've got two cello sections, one on the left, one on the right. You can do stuff like this. So I know it doesn't sound like it, but the accent that's being made with other instruments like the percussion and stuff is these notes here. So what I was kind of going for is like this weird kind of clock thing where it's like tick, so it's like tick, tock, tick, tock, tick. So that was the idea behind this section. I wanted it to kind of go left and right to create this weird kind of pulsing effect. Okay, so so yeah, let's move down to the brass section. And in fact, let me just show on the strings. So I was talking about earlier about how they've left space on the left hand side for the violins and stuff. So I did like this big kind of epic theme. So I put in some violins with some other library. In fact, no. We'll get to that in a minute, because I want to talk about how I layered it with other instruments later in one big group. So the brass, let's start at the beginning with the brass. Most of you would notice the bram, you know, the kind of what's been called the bram, B-R-A-A-A-A-A-M, bram, which sounds like this. So, you know, so you've got that big kind of bra. And so that brings me to the first instrument on that I've used here. So brass low. Let me just load this up again so you can see what I'm doing. Albion 3. So, you know, I've just loaded up the one, because you only get one brass low patch, and it encompasses all the articulations you're going to need. And again, I chose to you know, have one articulation per patch so that I could use different MIDI tracks. Much easier to show that way. So so the first one, the brass low. which is just this one. This is the long nasty patch. So the long nasty is, I've seen people complain about this, but I'm not sure why. It's very specifically just the triple F brass. It's just the really aggressive brass. So, you know, if you pull the dynamics down, it doesn't, you know, there's no, it doesn't get softer when you pull it down. It just gets quieter. But I think the point of this patch is for the exact way I used it. It's to create those really aggressive sounding notes, like, you know. As you can hear, it does those really huge brass sound. And I can imagine, you know, you've always, I mean, me in particular, I've had sections, you know, because I write quite a lot of big epic music, when I really wanted the horns to just kick up a notch. And, you know, having something so aggressively large, you know what I mean? There's a lot of players in the room, and it just sounds enormous, you know, particularly when you play an octave. So, like, it goes really low, which is awesome. Where, hello. Comes all the way down there. Let me just find it. It comes all the way down here. Obviously down there you would just be using that as an effect, because that is a bit too... Oh, it goes lower than that. Why is that not on the thing? You can see I'm actually playing lower than it tells me I can play here. I wonder why that is. Anyway, so it comes down at this A down here, and normally you would only use these for effects, and then it starts to get useful maybe around this E here, and then you can play that with the octave above, and you can create these really fat brass lines. So if I just play the high by itself, and now together, and you could probably fit in an octave above that. Lots of fun if you're into that sort of thing. So, which I am. And what you can see I've done here, one cool thing here is I've got all. This is one of the bonuses of, you know, splitting each patch into its own individual articulation, is because on these Brams I wanted a really full sound. I wanted a lot of room, but I also wanted a lot of aggression. So I was able to turn on every mic position here, and it still only takes 17 mega RAM. You know, so for this whole huge section, it's just 17 meg with all the mic positions on. I just turned them all up except the ambient, which I pulled down, which was a little, because then it started to get a little bit mushy when you had everything turned up, you know. So I was just picking and choosing what I wanted. I didn't do the big chords in there, and again, I wanted to show layering with other instruments and things. So I left a bit of space, but I did want to show how aggressive the Brams could be, and, you know, I can show you how you can play the nasty ones as big, huge, you know, massive chords. You know, one thing though I would say is that because it's so aggressive, you probably want open chord voicing. So like, you wouldn't want to play just like, you wouldn't want to just play like an E major or something as a closed chord. I mean, if you look down here, you'll see what I mean. You probably want to spread that out a bit. So like, or maybe like this. Just spread it out a bit. Or I think the best way to use this is to do it in fifths and octaves. missed that last chord. I left it on a hanging. Anyway, so yeah, so I could play with this brass thing all day, but I should move on. So the other part of this section was it was basically doubling the brams to make them sound more aggressive. They sound like this. And as you can hear, this is the short notes. So with the short notes, I wanted to, you know, just basically accent the percussion. Let me just load in the percussion. We'll get onto the percussion in a second, but one thing, if you're ever programming percussion with ostinatos, you know, like, or, you know, big accents, if you layer it with the low brass, it makes it sound a lot more aggressive. So this is just bum, bum. And again, I wanted a little bit more aggression, so I whacked in those close mics. And the dynamics on these ones are, as you can see, the dynamics here does nothing on the mod wheel. They're velocity control. And you can hear they're very snappy. So if I just pull down the close mics, this is what they sound like initially. Just adding a little bit of aggression. I'll show you what the close mics actually do to the sound. They're adding that on top of. So it just adds a little bit of crunch to the sound. I don't think I use that part much. No, I only use that in the beginning part to accent those beats. So that's the shorts. So then on the third part, I used these big chords. So in this section here, where I was trying to make the you know, the string sound really like evil, like a bad guy, I wanted to fill out the bottom end here with some brass chords. And instead of chords, I went with octaves. So it sounds like this. Oh, there's my phone. And that's such a beautifully full tone. This is about how aggressive the sustains go. And they come all the way up here. And they go all the way down there. And so the best way I've found to use these low brass sustains is as these kind of really filling chords, you know. And particularly down low, you know, the same with the nasty longs. They've got a very strong bottom end. So if you play like, you know, this D sharp, for example, and then you play the octave above it, it's a very full, very cinematic sound, actually. And I didn't want too much aggression, particularly because I used it in this section here. I also used it in the big thematic section, and I used that to pin down the whole brass section. So if I show you how I used it in the thematic section, the main reason to use this was as a background instrument, you know. It was pinning down the feeling of what's being played. So if I've got like these big kind of epic themes, this is pinning down the chordal, or the melodic kind of structure that it's in by playing, you know, chords. if I play the whole brass section here. And so now if I play this section without the low brass in, it sounds like this. With it, as you can hear, the difference is it pins down that feeling, you know, that feeling of a big brass section. Without it, it sounds quite thin. And then with it, it sounds very full. And you see, it doesn't need to be the most aggressive instrument in this instance. Again, I could, if I wanted, turn on the close mics to add a bit more aggression in there. As you can hear, it just adds like that extra kind of fizz on top. So that's all I used. That's all I used in this track on the brass. But let me just show you the other articulations that I did not use. So we used short, long, nasty, and long. Which track am I on? I'm on number 3. So there's also a legato, which I didn't use here. But again, this is good for the same way I use the strings, for really kind of dark melodic lines. Played out of the range there. So as you can hear, it's got that very kind of dark, brooding kind of brooding. Anyway, the dark kind of villainous. It's got a villainous tone to it. So then you also get some rips. These ones are the rips down. So the starting note is high and then it rips downwards. Rips up. And you get a whole bank of the effects. Which are good for like horror scores and, you know, creating a bit of tension. I can't cover every key, or this will be a 9-hour video, but the good thing about these effects that I found, I mean, I didn't find a place for them in this track, but the good thing about them is that they're very full and they bring in a lot of the room sound, which is good if you're you know, you're doing a film or a game score. You've got that part where everything's going to shit, you know. It really fills out the sonic spectrum. Just some weird soft sustains down here. Oh, they're weird, like bends. They're cool. So yeah, that's all the effects. So that's all the brass, actually. That's all the brass covered. What one instrument I didn't actually find a use for in this track was the woodwinds. So let me load those in on their own little track here. It's on track 7. Yeah. So drag it up to the top here. So the woodwinds. For the woodwinds, they recorded a very large kind of woodwind section. Oh. I would probably put the close mic on top of that. A very large, low woodwind section. Oh, weird instrument. Not weird instrument, weird line melody to play. So then you get short extra. I'm not sure the difference between the two, but it's mostly the lows, but there. Again, these are controlled on the velocity. So then we've got the longs. If you want to hear a good example, recently, a film score recently that uses deep and low woodwinds really well. Listen to Sherlock Holmes, a Game of Shadows, the second Sherlock Holmes film that Hans Zimmer did. That's a very good example of using low woodwinds to sound very evil and menacing. Again, I could have used that. Potentially I could have used that with this string line here. I just double that up, put it in here. How high does it go? I think there's a legato, so I'm just going to whack that on, which is actually the next instrument, which is awesome. Still loading it in. I could have used that as doubling. I wish I would have done now. Let me pull it in with the strings. Jeez. So yeah, very dark and menacing. I'm just going to leave that there. That's actually kind of cool. It's a very kind of nice, very good for layering. But yeah, very dark and menacing sound. It's got very similar to the brass, the articulation wise. So it's got the rips down, rips up, and then of course you've got your dark effects. And again, the effects are very good for bringing the hall into the equation. This one reminds me of a bubbling swamp. Good. You know somebody just died when you hear that. Someone just had an idea. What we got here? Oh, that is nice. Anything on these ones? Apparently not. Cool, and then the last bank. And then like some aggressive kind of sounding staccato effects. So that's the woodwinds, and that pretty much, so everything you've heard so far is that's just the orchestral section of it. I'm not sure how long the video is in now, but it feels like I've been talking for a week. So that's all the orchestral instruments you get. I've heard some people complain about that, and I think personally, you know, the amount of first, let me talk to the sound that you get. You've got to remember that each of these sections are much larger than you would record normally. So while this instrument is a very niche instrument in that respect, you can't get that kind of large sound another way. You could try layering other sample libraries together, but they will still sound like smaller sections that are all separate from each other, playing at the same time. Whereas when you record large sections like this, they've got their very own unique sound. So, you know, to have that sound in itself is, you know, a very valuable prospect. So let me move on to which was actually my biggest surprise of the entire library. One of the things I actually enjoyed the most, because those of you who know me know that I am a bit of a percussion whore. And an Albion 3 comes with a really, you know, aggressive, not aggressive maybe the wrong word, but a really kind of fat kind of percussion sound that's very playable. And at first I was a bit worried because it only came with the one patch, which is a key switchable patch. And, you know, I like to program these really big elaborate lines, but then I realized that you know, I was looking into these little folders here, and if you click on the palette shells for templates, you've got them all separated out. So this is all your percussion, you know, split out, which is what I went with in the end, because I prefer to have, again, with percussion, it's not so much for show. When it's percussion, I like to program them on their own MIDI track, you know, as you can see, like I've done here. I like to lay them out and like so. So my percussion section sounds like this. There's other sounds there. Here we go. My percussion section sounds like this. And as you can hear, that's a very big, thick sound. I was blown away by this because I wasn't expecting the percussion to be quite as big as it ended up being. And again, same technique. Whenever I wanted something to be more aggressive, I whacked on the close microphone. That's it without it. This is it with it. Just brings it a little bit closer. So this is 2 bass drums and 1 taiko playing at the same time. And they've split it onto 2 hands, and I think these are the same samples. So you would play like double-handed. So C and D seem to be the hits, and you get kind of an alternate hit on the E, and then you get rolls on the G. So for this, I just, you know, hammered down this. Just my accents. And then I moved on to the next instrument, which is my medium-low taiko. And this is the dynamics. It's velocity controlled again. So soft. Going up to hard. And again, so C and D are the attack, you know, the hits. Then you get like the kind of flamming on E and F. And then on G you get the side swipes. Which is a very kind of you know, it's a very kind of, the taiko used to like make you feel like you're in Japan, but it's so used now in film scores that it's now just one of the big kind of low-end percussions. And I think one of the reasons this was a big surprise for me is low percussion is quite hard to get sounding fat and aggressive, you know, and even the medium taiko itself is very big and hard and aggressive. And again, I put the close mic on. One thing I did notice though is because I run it through is when you play all these together, it gets quite there's because of the room sound, particularly percussion. And you've heard me like I think in my last ICENI percussion video, is when you layer lots of percussion together. And okay, I'm kind of trying to I'm skirting around what I'm trying to say. But what I'm actually trying to say is that the room sound on percussion is the most important part. But when you've got lots of instruments that aren't sampled at the same time playing in the same hall, while the instruments all layer well together, the room starts to stack. Not in any kind of aggressive or noticeable way, really, but you normally get a build up in the low end. So if I just play this section and then turn off my little EQ cut, as you can see, I just cut some, you know, around 100 hertz. You normally get a bit of mud, I guess you could say, round just around that kind of area. So I normally just, whenever I'm layering lots of instruments recorded in the same hall, just give it a little cut, and it just pulls that little room build up away. But you don't want to cut it too much, because percussion and room sound of percussion is the most important part of it, and you know, you don't want to cut that out of it. And the tree mics, by the way, are very they're a really nice mix of close and ambient kind of. I mean, I know they're their own microphone, but they're a good balance between the ambient and the overhead mics and the close. So normally tree by itself gives you enough room. If I just turn these down, you can really feel the room. And then, you know, close mic. And you know, for those of you who saw my last video, saw me raving about how I love the Cine Perc mic positions. Same thing here, particularly on percussion. If you're doing a percussion library, please record it with more than one microphone, because, you know, having the option to add more or less room to the sound of a percussion instrument is very, it's not important per se, it's just a really, you know, great option to have. So moving down, then we've got the orange drum, which is probably the only instrument within the entire library which isn't like a low instrument in its sound. It's quite a high-pitched instrument, but it's good for. And again, C and D hits, and then flams on E and F, and then G is your roll. On this one, I didn't want too much aggression because it's the high instrument, so I put an ambient mic on just to, you know, fatten it out a little bit. So moving down, we've got the table taiko. What I actually did with this one is, because, as you can hear, there's a lot of instruments here, and they're all recorded what sounds like down the middle. You know, so their position in 3D space is right in the center. So what I did here is I just pushed it over to the left a little bit. Oh, I just want my small taiko. And this one without the close mic was quite far away. So I just put in some close mic to make it a bit closer and a bit more aggressive. And then on the other side, the table taiko. I said this was the table taiko. It was the small taiko. And the table taiko sounds like this. Again, a little bit of close mic just for aggression. And you play the two together. This one I pan to the right just to add a bit of dimension, you know, a bit of space. I mean, so this is on the right. This is on the left. Play them together. That's why these two are playing the exact same parts, because they're two different sounds but spread out. Goes with the whole kind of, you know, the way the cellos are spread out. That was the principle anyway. So then we've got a few different sections of the percussion playing like this. And then like this. And then like this. So as you can hear, very big and aggressive. And I think I actually used every, yeah, I did. I used every single medium. Yeah, I used every except this one, the table with. Let me load that instead of. What am I on? Number 3. which is a very, very thick sound. It was a little bit too imposing, which is why I didn't throw that in as well. You know, I could throw a close mic on. So if you're doing trailer music, that's a good snappy one. Let me just put the orange one, and then boom, boom. It was something like that. So that's all the percussion instruments, and as you can hear, it's a very fat and thick sound. Particularly works well with the other instruments, you know, as you would expect. And that there is just the orchestral sounds working together. So as you can hear, you've filled out. A lot of people were saying that you can't write with Albion 3. You know, it doesn't fill out the sound. Like it only, you know, it leaves a lot lacking. And as you can hear, this is just Albion 3 percussion and orchestra. That wasn't, but then this section didn't, but I'll get into that in a second. So as you can hear, you know, you can fill out a really thick low end with just Albion 3. I'll get into what I layered with it a little bit later. So let's move on to, in fact, no, wait, there was one thing I needed to mention before moving on. So here we have, I won't cover all of these because there are a lot of them. So as you can see down here, I've got hybrid A loops. Now this looks a little bit different than the other Brunel loops. Here we go. It looks a little bit different from the other UI setups. You know, there's no microphones and there's lots of little dots. Well, let me explain to you what the little dots do. You know, because I'm a nice guy. So here we go. It's down here. So basically, what happens is when you load in one of these, it will look like this, and the tempo sync is off. That's very important. A lot of people were saying it's broken. This is by design. So when I push a key down here, I'll first say what they are. These are basically banks of loops, as you know, implied by the loops part of it. And so when you first load in a patch, what you want to do is you want to just stop your sequencer and just listen to the sounds you want. So let's say I wanted this instrument. I like the sound of it. I can see that it's at 80 BPM, and as you can see, I'm at 120. So speeding up is normally better than slowing down when it comes to the algorithms that they use for speeding and slowing up sounds. Because normally when you get a patch, like a loop or something in a sample library, it's sampled at one tempo, and then like Kontakt will slow it up or speed it down depending on what you've done. And normally things sound better when they're sped up than when they're slowed down. You know, when it slows down, you start hearing artifacts and stuff. When it's sped up, it just feels a bit more choppy. So let's say I like this loop. To make it tempo synced, I just click on the dot that lights up. And now, as you can see down here, I'm on this loop. So now I can't use any of these other loops. I can only use this loop. So, but it's now tempo synced. And what you get is you actually get variations on the actual sound itself. Over on the right, it's like just slices. And then on the left, you get variations. So you get the main loop. And then you get like a couple of other. So I could click on this one and then it should change. And this is the one I used here. This is what I actually liked. But then when I put it in context of the track, it was a bit busy, so I just went with just that snappy part, if you listen out for it. You know, really adds a nice snappy little driving part to it. There are a lot of loops here, so I won't go over them all, but so let me just load one. I'll just play you a couple. The types of loops you get. Fuckhead. So you get some bassy kind of sounds. Very kind of aggressive sounding ones. Go on in, Christian, let's see what you got. Christian's got some cool little distortion in there, that's awesome. There's some really aggressive things, and then the hybrid ones, which I think I used. Which one did I use? I used like Donkey or something. Use that one instead, just because I can. Okay, so then we move into the last section of the library. I'm not sure how long we're going. This feels epic though, but we're going for it. We're doing it live. Do it live. Okay, so now we're into the synth section, which is a whole different library almost in itself. So we've done the Steam synth. This is the pads and the synths. So the pads look like the synths. No, this is one of the pads, I think, but we'll have a look at some other ones. But so the synths, my synth section. So we've got two different synth sections. One that sounds like this, in context of the track, that sounds like this. As you can hear, it's the main part of that sound. And then we've got this big action section here. As you can see, my EQ here is going a bit crazy. I just did a little EQ trick, like externally, only because it was easier. I just hit record and then just grabbed that and then just went crazy with it. Just creates this weird kind of effect. You can do it inside this, and I'll show you how in a second. So let me take a listen. So start on number 1. Okay, so let's take a look at the interface. So as you can see, this is different. There's no like faders or anything like this. So first off, your envelope. So we'll take a look here. So low pass and high pass filters, you can change these by dragging. And of course, if you wanted to assign that to the mod wheel, you can just right click learn and move your mod wheel. High pass. Attack, decay, sustain, release. Same as always. You know, they make sense. And then you can change things like wobbles. I kind of wish this was like you could change it between 16ths instead of hertz. There may be a way to do this, but if there is, I haven't figured it out. Like, so you could have it tempo synced wobbles and such. But you know, it's still useful like this because you know you can create some weird. So the volume's going in and out, and you could just turn that off by pulling it down. Pitch, you know. You pull it off, and then filters. You know, it'd be good if I could make that 16. And then the effects panel. Now, a lot of people would have missed the effects. So let's say we've got sound like this. If I want to turn like chorus on, for example, let me turn this off first. Chorus, I just click it. It, you know, instantly fattens the sound, or distortion. And I saw some people having a bit of confusion. They were like, well, I don't like the sound of that. And all you have to do is hold Command and then click on them. So on Command for me is like the Apple button. So I assume you would hold maybe Control or Shift or Alt. You have to try on Windows, I'm not sure because I can't test it myself. But you like say I wanted like delay. If I wanted to change the delay, I just hold my Command button, click on delay, and now I can change the time. You know. I could change the dry and the wet, so I wanted more delay in there. And then if I want to turn it off, I just click it again and boom, boom, it's gone. And then they've got this cool little XY pad up here. From my own experience of sample library development, making an XY pad is extremely difficult because you can't, at present, there's no way to make it so you can grab this center bit and move it around at will. So you have this kind of slider pattern. And the cool thing about this is it's automated over here, as you can see. So you can change what effects you want. So you can create these weird kind of, and you can assign these as well to, you know, right click on them, assign them to faders and such. The cool thing about this is you can make it so that, what did I change there? Oh God. Oh, okay. Sorry. You can make it so that, like, say on the x-axis, I wanted to have the chorus wet amount, and then I want the reverb wet amount. So let me turn on the reverb and the chorus. And pull these both down. Oh God. This is one of the problems of Contact. If you grab something that isn't a fader, you end up moving the patch. So. God damn it. So I could, for example, this could go horribly wrong, but bear with me. So I'm just going to try and automate. I'll do it here. I'll solo it by itself. So let me just put it here. I'll just make a thing, and then I will change. Let me get the automation so it's changing that. So I could change like the automation to go like down, and then up a little bit, and then down. And then I'll gradually bring it back in like so, and then I'll change the other one, which is, you can't see when I'm selecting it here, it changes between the two. So now I'm changing this one. I'll automate this so that it starts on, calms down, then comes in. And this is just a cool way to create weird effects. Oh, Jesus. A little bit chaotic. Now this is one thing that they must have assigned, pre-assigned all the, you know, all the things to automation lanes, all the, you know, parameters to automation lanes, because I get all sorts of craziness, you know, if I turn the automation lanes off. So as you can see, I'm making the XY pad move, but that's how you would do it. So let me just Control Z my way out of this. Okay, so we fixed it. So that's basically how you would use the new UI that you've got here. So let me move down and show you what I actually wrote. So like I say, I got that section. So this here is the slurred 16ths. And so when you load in something like the slurred 16ths, which I believe, oh Christ, I'm gonna have to find it. There's a lot of, I won't be going over every single synth instrument because there are too many, which is a good thing. But where is it? Where is my slurred 16ths? Okay, so it's not there. God damn, where do I go? Sam. Okay. Anyway, so I assume it's in here somewhere. So on this one, for example, you get attack, decay, sustain, release, which a little bit weird on a looped instrument like this, because if I turn the sustain down, you know, it'll switch off. I can make it so it's just a little, so it's almost like a one shot. So you know, not much going on there. But another thing is when you get one of the ones that look like this, where you only get the ADSR on the front page, if you click this little button here, it takes you to the effects panel, and to change these, it's a bit different than it is up here. Let me turn those off. So it's a little bit different because the controls that are like this on this patch are now faders on this patch, and if you want to change, you just click the thing, click the drop down here, and you can change you know, what effect you want. Please select an effect parameter from the left, click that blum blum to open the sequencer. So if I wanted to open the sequencer, if I wanted to have the dry wet going on off, I click this, and then I can, you know, resolution, zoom out, you know, so if I want it to go on, then off, then on. Can I turn this off? Oh yeah. I don't think that, I may have used that incorrectly, but that's, you know, if you want to go to the sequencer, you can change it down here. So then we move on. The next part I've got is my gritty strings. As you can see, I've got quite a few effects on this one. Phaser, flanger, reverb, delay. Without them, it sounds like this. It goes to show how important effects are. Now, again, I could create some, put some filter effects in there, make it a bit more crazy. Maybe some pitch. Maybe not. So nice and easy to change. So that's just, my whole synth section kind of works together. So when I solo things out, it sounds a little bit odd, but just doubling up the percussion. And then you play the whole synth section together, you get. And again, like at the end. And there's all sorts of these types of synths. Like I say, I won't be going into them all because there's way too much. But there's a whole, you know, there's a whole host of these kind of. The majority of them are the dark, aggressive type sounds. You know, really low down. But in the pad section, you get things like this, which sounds to me like affected orchestral instruments. And here I used it like this, you know, just to pad out this section. So there's in the pads particularly, there's plenty of high instruments. In the synth section, there's lots of you know, really distorted and aggressive ones, which is really cool. But like I said, there's way too much for me to cover everything. But these are the 4 banks you get: synths, pads, Octavia, which sounds like... I'll just replace it with this. Oh, this must have been where I got the slurry thing from, but... Dirty Woods. Oh God, it could become unstable. That's just Contact panicking. So yeah, that you get plenty of different synth sounds and, you know, orchestral instruments. So that's pretty much all the content within Albion. Again, you know, there's lots of synths that I won't be going into because of the amount. But, you know, you hear they're very dark and gritty and aggressive. And altogether, you know, you get, if I just play the Albion parts by themselves, you've probably forgotten what the actual full track sounded like, but I'll get into that in 1 second. So, is this one? No. Albion, and then Albion synths. So just the Albion sections sound like this. My synths aren't playing, I can't figure out why. Maybe because they had a panic. So you can really fill out your low end with the, you know, with just that low, you know, with Albion rather. With Albion 3 ICENI, you can really fill out that low end of your track, and it doesn't necessarily have to be the big trailery thing like you heard at the beginning. You know, you can do the big trailery thing, but you don't have to, because then you can also load in sections like this which are really dark and moody. You know, you can really lower it in underneath other tracks. And that brings me into what I wanted to talk about last, which is how well Albion 3 layers with other libraries. And you see, Albion 3 is one of those libraries which is very niche. And when you get niche libraries, they're normally not... they're only going to be useful for one situation, which is what they're designed for. So Albion 3 is for that dark, you know, aggressive, low-end, big, epic thing. But I wanted to show that when it comes to doing the dark, gritty, epic thing, you don't have to just use Albion 3 by itself. You can use, some libraries don't layer well with other libraries. They don't work very well. Maybe the hall is too, you know, in your face, or maybe it's too thin. I know that, you know, people have had trouble with, you know, LA scoring strings, for example, because it's very dry. But, you know, if you know how to work it in with reverb and stuff, it's, you know, it's a brilliant layering tool. But there's some libraries which are easier to layer with others. And this is one of those which, you know, just naturally seems to layer well with other instruments. So, for example, in my big epic section on the strings, I've brought in some strings from cinematic strings. Just, you know, a couple of violins. And so if I play without them first, I'll just play the string section. So that's Albion 3 by itself. Now if I bring in the strings from another library and play them all together. As you can hear, it works, the strings in particular work very well when layered with other sounds, which I wanted to show. So then the brass, how well does the brass layer with other instruments? So I'm using the big epic section because everything before here orchestrally was Albion only. So if you listen to the track, it's called The Pirate Island, it's on my SoundCloud. If you listen to the first half, the orchestral stuff is all Albion 3, and then at this point, as you can see here, mixed with other libraries. So Albion 3 here sounds like, well, not that one. So I just used this really big fat sustain, which, you know, used it almost like a pad, just to fill out that really aggressive, not aggressive, really kind of lush, kind of big low end. And then you layer it in with, I'll show you what I layered it with. I layered it with the 12 horns, fitting because of how big the brass section is in Albion 3. So the big 12 horn section from ICENI Brass. I used the horns and trombones patch from their Albion version, Albion 1 version 3 update rather. And then I used Orchestral Brass Classic for trombones. So together, layering the brass, just the brass section. So this is Albion 3 layered with those others. It sounds like this. So as you can hear, again, it works very well with other instruments. If you put the brass and the strings together, this is Albion 3 on, you know, the low end of the brass and the strings, and then, you know, the other instruments together. I think it sounds, I think it layers fantastically well with others. Very thick kind of layering sound. So the percussion by itself in that section sounds like this. Now you see, I was actually happy with this percussion section sounding like that by itself, but I thought, being as though I'm layering everything else with other libraries, I'd show you what the percussion sounds like. So I've loaded up some Epic Toms, Epic Dole, ICENI Core orchestral cymbals, and some of the Albion cymbals. So if again, this is Albion by itself, and then you bring in some other percussion sounds like this. And you see, that's the cool thing about this, is even when I take out those extra percussion, the Albion 3 percussion is still really strong and powerful, which is awesome. And then I've got some extra like sound effects and things. If I just bring these in as well, if I layer the percussion with the sound effects. And then I've got some choir, but the choir's just for filling things out. So, you know, as you can see, it works well with other libraries, while at the same time, sections like this show that it can do it. Let me just turn off the sound effects quick. Sections like this beginning bit show that it can fill out a really large epic section by itself. So all in all, you know, that covers everything that you know I wanted to show on Albion 3. But you know, like the final thoughts, I guess, if you could call it that, is what, you know, Albion 3 is very much a niche instrument. So if you need that low aggressive end. If you need a big low end, it's fantastic for those orchestral things, because like I said earlier, it's its own thing. You can't really layer like a bunch of sample. You can't take like loads of low brass, like regular low brass section samples, and put them together and expect to get that kind of feeling of a large brass section. It's like the same as you couldn't take, or you could, but it takes a lot of work. You couldn't take like one violin and make it sound like 100 violins. And you could layer it up and you could get close, but it wouldn't sound the same as if you had 100 violin players in the same room. Mainly due to like the physics of the way that 100 instruments change, the way they distort the air, as lots of weird, physical things that go on there. But when one player moves a string, the air that comes, the air waves, the sound waves that are coming off the string, only manipulates the air in the room one way. But when you've got 100, it's manipulating the air in 100 different ways, and then the manipulation from one violin is manipulating the air from another violin, which creates a completely different hybrid of sounds. Whereas when you've got 100 individual instruments manipulating the air, they don't manipulate each other's air. And I'm surprised that there hasn't been a reverb or something that's like tried to emulate this yet. But normally that's why I run everything through a reverb in itself, because it kind of gets you there. But physically speaking, as in physics, in the real world, when you have more instruments, they're all manipulating the sound waves of each other, which create this hybrid kind of airwave. The airwave sounds completely different, which is why 10 violins sounds different from one violin when you listen to it. It's just the way it moves the air. So Albion 3 is recorded with a lot more players, and you can tell. And there've been all sorts of debates about it's too expensive for what you get, and you see, that's the thing, it's a niche instrument. You won't find something like that elsewhere. There's very few sample libraries which have recorded this amount of players. I think the only other people I could think of is ICENI Samples, who did the mega low brass and the 12 horn section, and then I think maybe VSL's Epic Horns had 8 horns, for example. When you record these bigger sections, it's a different sound. It's its own thing. So due to I think when you're talking about like, is it worth it? Is it not? When it comes to Albion 3, because you're getting so many players that have actually sat down together and recorded, it's worth it. Sheerly because you can't get that elsewhere. And you could always go to Air and record that many players yourself, but I think when you compare the prospect price of doing it for yourself compared to buying a sample library that does it for you, you'll see that one is a lot cheaper than the other. But I mean, personally speaking, I love that sound of having that recorded in place. I wish they would have done like the percussion as one big ensemble as well. That's just nitpicking though. Like if they would have recorded like, I don't know, like 100 drum players hitting a drum at the same time, because that air would have been manipulated to hell. But it would have been, kind of cool. But yeah, and then you throw on top of that the percussion, which is the biggest surprise for me, which I actually really like about this. It's very very thick and very strong sounding. It can get muddy, but a little EQ cut solves that right away. And then you get all the synth things, which are really aggressive, and they fit with the aesthetic of the other instruments. And like I did over here, layering these synths up with the percussion so that they're rhythmically going along with the percussion. It really adds that grit and that kind of hard edge which the library's going for. So all in all, Albion 3 is definitely the most out there. It's definitely not like Albion or Albion 2. It's a very niche kind of library, but if you're in the need for it, there's not much alternative out there. I think the closest you get to a sound this large is maybe, other than Cinebrass, maybe not even Symphonia. I'm tempted to say Symphobia, but Symphobia doesn't sound that large. It's that library's more like conventional sized orchestra. This is a very large sound. So if that's what you need, if you're doing, if you're in maybe let's say you're doing big fantasy films, like Lord of the Rings-esque, you want a big sound like that, or you're doing something like big epic trailer music, or you're doing, you know, just anything large with a, you know, a very fat low end. You know, I think this is going to be right up your alley. You'll find value in it. You know, but if you're writing conventional, you know, for lack of a better term, John Williams-esque music, or, you know, very conventional classical styles, you might not find, you may feel like it hasn't got, you know, you may look at it and think, you know, I'm getting no value out of this, because, you know, you don't want that large sound. You want a regular sound, in which case you've got things like Albion, Albion 2, Symphobia, blah, blah, blah. But again, you know, I've said it like 7 times in a row now. If you're after that large thing, that's what Albion 3 is all about. And as I think I've shown, and, you know, you can disagree with me, I think it delivers on what it promises it can do. And that is that large low end. So I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this video. I get the feeling it's been a long one. If you've made it all the way through, thank you for watching. I hope you found it at least... You know, I hope you found something to latch onto. I hope you enjoyed the video. If not, you know, I hope it was at least a little bit entertaining. If not, sorry for wasting your time. And I shall see you all in the next video. Cheers, guys. I'll see you later. Bye.